I'm Tanya Fox, and you're listening to Fox Talks Business Podcast. I started my career in the corporate world, but always played to my own tune and loved to think outside of the box. This didn't always serve me well with the bosses, so I made the decision to become an entrepreneur. And that little seed of entrepreneurial curiosity continued to grow as I branched out into retail, service, and franchise businesses. Now, I have been fortunate to have amazing successes in the last 2 decades, but they did not come without some really big failures and even bigger lessons learned. And that's why I started this podcast, not just to share the failures, but to show you how you can turn every failure into a success. We're going to hear from some amazing humans from around the world that are going to share their stories of the good, the bad, and the motivational entrepreneurial life has to offer. After all, life is too short to make all of the mistakes yourself, so why not learn from each other? And of course, we're going to have some fun, because as I always say, well, you know what? I'll tell you that at the end of the episode. Hello, Foxy listeners. Thank you so much for tuning in today. I am really excited. My guest today is Prit. She has such an interesting story as well. We're going to get into a lot of great tips and stuff like that for your business, but you guys have got to hear her story. Prit, thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, thank you, Tanya, for having me on your podcast. Such an absolute pleasure. I'm super, super excited to be here to help your audience in any way I can. And of course, to share my story too.
So let's talk a little bit about your story, because one of the things I talk about a lot on the show is, you know, when we have failures or we have things that sort of come unexpected, sometimes we have to pivot really quickly and we can get really stuck in that. And you have a fantastic story about that. So I want to share it with our listeners because I think it'll help put maybe a little bit of things into perspective for them.
Sure. So shall I start?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So my story actually starts a little bit before, probably 5 years backwards, I guess. We have to go a little bit of a rewinding. So I am an engineer by degree. It's a little bit surprising because I am the marketing nomad as it's my online pseudonym. So sometime in my second year of engineering, I realized that this was not for me. Nope. It was not something that I could see the next 40 years of my life. I could not imagine it. And for me personally, I really wanted to have a life of passion. I wanted that kind of passion in my career as well. That was very important for me. And so during my second year, I'm just, lazing around the house during the summer holidays. And then my dad, he's a very typical Indian parent. He comes up to me and he says, why don't you, get some real life experience? And I was really grumpy about this because one, I did not want to work during summer holidays. And number two, I didn't want to have anything to do with my engineering degree. And so I told him, well, with the marks I was getting, there was nobody out there who's going to hire me for an internship. And my dad, of course, this was a joke. My dad laughed. My mom was not amused. She's also another typical Indian mom there. So basically, both my parents are entrepreneurs. I think it's important for me to mention that right now. So my dad, he took me to his office the next day and he said, okay, why don't you just spend some time with the team? Okay, I've got a team. They're kind of fixing the website. So they were going from, they were kind of putting all their systems digital at the time. This was a good, I think, 7, 8 years ago. And so I was talking to the team, and my job, I was not even an intern, to be honest with you. My job was just not to loiter and help the team in any way that I could. And so I started off with maybe fixing the grammar and sentences, or then there was another sentence that I thought if I framed it differently, it could, sound a lot better. And then I went to another web page, and then I saw that the color scheme was not matching the entire website. So I pointed that out. Slowly, I moved on to social media. That was Facebook at the time. And I helped them with captions because I love writing, and so on and so forth. And I absolutely enjoyed my time, Tanya. It's just 8 hours in a day flew by. I went to work with him very, very willingly. He was surprised. And I even went back the next 2 summers of my engineering degree. And during this time, there is a common misconception in many societies, actually, that you either have to be a doctor, engineer, or a lawyer for you to be successful. And quite frankly, I think I succumbed to that societal pressure. And that's why I was so hesitant to even move out of engineering or even think that any other field could be a possibility. So around the fourth year of my engineering, it was time for me to decide what my next steps were. And I was pretty sure that engineering was not the route. I could not see myself doing it. So at that time, I kind of realized that I always had a natural inclination to start my business someday. Both my parents are entrepreneurs. So through dining table conversations, there was a natural push for me to go that way, or rather pull, I guess, more than push. It was a pull for me to go that way. So I ended up submitting my applications for MBA programs across the world. I did get into Rochester Institute of Technology, which is in upstate New York. And I was absolutely overjoyed. It was a 2-year MBA program, and I felt that I would find my passion some way or the other in those 2 years. And so I'm there, Tanya, in the first marketing class. I'm sitting there in class, the professor's asking questions just to gauge the knowledge of the class. And I'm there like a super nerd, raising my hands for every single question, and which was quite unlike me because, well, I was not, I used to look at people like that and be like, why are you so nerdy, and, those kind of things. And suddenly that was me. And it wasn't normal marketing questions. It was questions like 10 years ago, Coca-Cola campaign, what interested me about it? Or 3 years ago, some Maggie campaign. And I kind of knew all of these things. It didn't make sense to me at the time. But now when I look back, I think that all my life had led to that moment. I had, constantly absorbed materials about marketing, about branding, without even realizing it was called marketing. It was called branding. And so in that marketing class, I even remember exactly what I was wearing. It's kind of, that light bulb moment that you see in the movies. That's exactly what happened to me. And I found my passion. And my story actually starts there. It doesn't end there, to be honest. So I have completed my MBA at this time. I am doing so well for myself, completely rocked my MBA program, found my passion, found a great job at a top solar firm in New York, which is on Long Island, and amazing friends, amazing colleague. I mean, just perfect life.
Living the life,
so,
yeah.
Yeah, I was living the life. I mean, it was New York, and I was so close to New York City. I think I was like 15 minutes by the LIRR. So, oh God, it was the really best life ever. So I was on a student visa. Every international student gets about, I think it's around 10 months of optional practical training, where you can choose to opt for to work under your student visa, and then your employer has to convert that student visa into a work visa for you. And my employer was completely on board. They wanted me to be a part of the company permanently, and so they applied for the work visa. Now, for those of you who may not know, the work visa in the United States, it's a lottery. And in 2019, this happened in 2019, April was when you submit the application. There were 200,000 approximately applications, and only 85,000 are actually processed. And mine wasn't one of them. And it was so heartbreaking. It was absolutely painful to have realized that the future that I thought for myself was no longer going to happen. Everything that I had identified with, like my surroundings, the people around me, everything just came crashing overnight. And it was very, very difficult for me to cope with that entire loss of my own self, loss of perception of my own reality. And it was around this time, I was sad for a couple of weeks. I'm not going to deny that. I was in a pretty dark place, actually. And it was around this time.
When you got this, like, how long did you have before they were like, you got to go?
Yeah, I got a good 3 months. I got a good 3 months to basically wrap up my life in New York and move back to India.
Which is not a lot of time if you think about it, like 3 months. Like I'm just like, I think I'd love, and that was the thing to me when I was, reading about your story. I thought, like, I can't imagine, like, even to move across the country, it took me like 6 months of planning, and I didn't have to do any paperwork for it. Like, so it's a short amount of time. Brutal. Yeah.
It was a pretty short amount of time. And I think because it was so short, I think that led to me starting my entrepreneurial journey. So in a way that was good. So at this point, I started putting my resumes out on LinkedIn. I mean, I knew that was the next step. So I was kind of drafting my resume, and it was annoying basically because I'd just done that a year ago to get the job for the option or OPT, and the job hunt, it's not pretty. It's not a pretty space there. So at this time, I'm thinking, okay, well, I'm already at level 0. I'm down there already. What if I ended up starting my own business, see how it works out for a year, and if it doesn't, well, I can always get back to LinkedIn, put my resume online, and just get a full-time job. But if I did not use this opportunity, I'm already at ground zero. If I didn't use this opportunity, I think I might regret it later. And within that 3 months, I completely shifted gear. I set up my profile on freelance platforms. I bought a domain for the website. I started creating with whatever knowledge I had about website creation. And then before I landed in India, I think it was September 3rd, 2019, I already had one client. So it was in that span of 3 months that I kind of pushed myself and I said, I really have to turn this around before I land in India. And that was actually how it started out. It was brutal. But Tanya, if I look back 3 years on, I think I would, if I had to go through it again, I would. Because the amount of craziness the last 3 years and also liberation that the last 3 years have brought me, I don't think I would have had it come to me in any other way. So yeah, that's the origin of my entrepreneurial story.
And do you find that that short amount of time that you had kind of pushed you to do maybe more than what you would have done if you would have had the freedom to kind of take your time to do it? Because perfectionism and that stuff, do you find that that would kind of maybe have crept in for you?
Absolutely. I think the fact that I had 3 months to figure my life out, and I think it was just the deadline I gave myself. It's not that I couldn't have come back to India and figure my life out. I'm sure that my parents and my sister would have been very supportive. But I think in that pain, in that anger, because I was really angry at my fate, I think that anger kind of pushed me to, I kind of channeled that anger, I guess I would say, into my work, and in a way it helped to distract me from the pain. So I guess time was one of the factors that I gave myself that deadline. And I think that I was in too much pain to even think about anything else, like perfectionism or all of those things weren't in my mind at that time. Of course, those did slip in once I had gotten a good grasp of my current reality. But at the time, no, it's actually a blur how those 3 months went by. I just know that I took it each day as it came. Like I worried about getting up the next day, doing whatever I had to, then getting up the next day. I did not want to think too far ahead because again, my future that I had thought of had vanished, and I didn't have the heart in me to even dream of a future at that point.
So when did it start? Like, when were you able to kind of get back to that forward thinking, that future thinking again?
That's actually a good question because I think this was around February of 2020. So a good 6 months, 6 to 7 months after I had landed in India. At that time, I could see that my progress on the freelance platforms, on my social medias, I kind of figured I'm doing something right. Something's clicking here. And I realized at that time that I couldn't live day by day. I had to figure out, sit down and analyze, did I want to take this further? What was my 1 year, 2 year, or 5 year? And if the 1 year plan was to stop it and then go back on LinkedIn for a full-time job, I still needed to plan all that. So I think once I had grasped reality and seen some semblance of success, of the effort that I was putting in, I think I realized that, okay, it's time for me to start looking ahead. And that's actually when I created a 1 year plan, and then a 2 year plan, and then a 5 year plan. It was very daunting. It was very scary, but I'm glad I did that.
And do you find like, so I think a lot of people do this in business. They sort of create their plan And of course, when you're doing it 5 years back, I know when I do mine, sometimes I look at it and I have moments where I'm like, oh my God, like what small thinking, like, oh, I've so surpassed it. And then other times I look at it and go, what the hell was I thinking? Like, what on earth thought that I would be able to get
Yes.
this done in 2 years, kind of thing. Did you have the same sort of thing?
No, I think by that time, I mean, my goals and life vision before the H-1B fiasco was definitely, as you said, very vague and just frilly. And, I don't know what I was thinking, to be honest. And for the most part, I think I just followed what everyone else's dream or vision or plan was up until then. So when it came to February 2020, when I started to actually plan, I think that, again, lessons learned from the pain, I knew that I couldn't be vague or frilly about the whole thing. So I started keeping very, very realistic goals and actionable steps to, I kind of work backwards. Okay, where do I see myself 5 years from now? Is that a realistic goal? How do I make it realistic? Even if it, sometimes people say that you either over anticipate your short term and then you kind of undervalue your long term. So I was kind of in that mode. But when I worked back and figured out, okay, if I want to be an author by year 2, then I got to start writing right now. Those kind of small steps have taken me, and I think I'm actually on track, which was surprising to me because at one point in my life, I think I was very frilly about my goals. But I think life kind of teaches you, and you learn. I think through this entrepreneurial journey, you learn how to be more grounded. You learn how to have realistic goals. I think it's a teacher in that way.
Yeah. And I think too, do you find that you sort of learn what, I remember when I first started business, of course it was like, I want to have all of these employees. I want to
Yes.
have this, big organization. And, when I got
Yeah.
there and I went, this is shit. Like, this is a lot of work. Like, I don't want to do this. What was I thinking? And
Yes.
so that perception, the farther,
Yes.
I'm 24 years into business. And now when I look back on, my $2 to $4 million plan, and I'm like, no, I know how much work that
No.
takes. I don't want that anymore.
Absolutely. Oh my God, 100%, Tanya. I think that people hear the word entrepreneur and immediately they go, oh, 8, 9, 10 figures, let's hit that kind of. But it's really, I don't know. I don't have those kind of goals. For me, it's actually a very, very different perception. What I define as success is actually very different from the very common perception that most people probably do have. And I think that's one of the reasons why I even started writing my book. And that was because I wanted each of us to learn how to define our own successes instead of just, whatever everyone else's perception of success is. To you, Tanya, it might be something else. For me, I want to travel the world. And, having a 9, 10 figure business does not allow me that kind of flexibility. The reason why I even decided to take up this entrepreneurial journey is very different from someone else's decision. And I think we as entrepreneurs need to acknowledge that and understand that your goals may be different, mine may be different, but they are still successes all the same.
And I want to talk a little bit about the book, because I think this is important, because what I find, and I find sometimes this gets me into trouble a little bit. It gets interesting conversations, but nobody talks about under 6-figure goals.
Oh my God.
Everybody
Yes.
constantly talks about like way at the top, way,
Yes.
and this happens to me, when I talk to people about collaborations, and, they always say, why don't you talk about your big ones? And I go, because that takes years and years to do.
Yes.
Like, sure, I can tell you like about a collaboration I did with Coca-Cola, but it ain't going to happen for you. Like, I don't, it's that pie-eyed fluffy stuff,
Yes.
right? Like,
yes.
the people who go, and I remember this even when I did my podcast, people would, I remember being a part of a group and they were like, write down like who the dream would be to have. And I'm writing down names and I'm watching everybody else and they've got like Ellen and Oprah. And I'm like, are you out of your freaking mind? like, I think Oprah's coming
Oh,
on your
God,
podcast.
yes.
Like, I love you dearly and it's a great goal to have. I think Oprah's coming on your podcast. And I was writing like Susie down the street, like who has a business and, kind of thing. So I want you to talk a little bit about the book because I think it talks to a more realistic, and I think, well, anyways, tell us about the book and then it'll make sense to people. I'm giving it all away. It's not even my damn book.
Well, thank you, Tanya, but you absolutely hit the right spot. So my book's name, I think, let's start with that. It's 0 to 4 Figures, Lessons Learned by a Broke CEO. And it's basically stories and lessons that have contributed to my entrepreneurial journey. I've got about 60 lessons, 60. So it's a big book. It's like 380 pages. And I basically started writing this because when I started out, this was in 2019, I was really, really, really frustrated about the lack of resources for the initial stages of one's entrepreneurial journey. There are tons and tons of books out there on how to hit 6 or 8 figures. And I would read those books and I would, have these imaginary conversations with the authors. And I'm like, it's awesome that you've hit 6 figures and 8 figures, but how did you get to like 2? Okay, like 2 figures or 3, and then how did you hit 4? And then when you hit 4, how did you do that consistently? These were the imaginary conversations that I had, and all of the advice that I did see online were not sustainable for the amount of investment that I had put for my business. I had no financial backing. Whatever was my savings, I risked it all, and that wasn't much, frankly. It was just hardly 9 months of work. And I was living in New York and I was living my best life. So there was not much savings going on over there. Let me remind you that. And so, with the amount of investment that I could put in, all of these people, they would say, oh yeah, you can have 10K launches. And then they would spend 100K on ads. And I'm like, yes, okay, well, I do not have that. Not right now.
But I do not have enough money to hire an assistant and a social media manager and
exactly.
Right. And I felt, I felt the same way in business, that you're like, well, that's really great, but it's me and the dog.
Absolutely. And I could not for the life of me. Like, I have joined courses and all of them, they would say, oh, you need this $400 client management system. And I'm here barely, I could not even afford $12 a month at some point in my entrepreneurial journey. And that was the state that I was in. And I thought this couldn't be it. I mean, no, it's not that. Yes, I know there's a common saying that you need money to make money, but what is the point of entrepreneurship if you can't learn to build from scratch? There must be a path. And that's when I started documenting my journey. And as and when I learned, of course, I've made tons of mistakes along the way because I didn't really go down the normal path. But at the same time, documenting my journey, I felt that it was important for more people to realize how I did what I did. And that's the theme of my book. I do not tell you what to do. I never do. I don't like doing that. Personally, I'm not that kind of person. If somebody tells me what to do, I would probably do the opposite. I'm kind of like a rebel like that. So I don't tell people what to do, but I do like to share what I did. And hopefully it's a good starting point for them on their entrepreneurial journey, for them to figure out what works for their business, because the factors that affect me are very different from the factors that affect you. The resources that I have access to, the resources that I do not have access to are very, very different as well. Age, gender, race, religion, all of those factors do come into play at some point. And I guess that was the whole point of my book, was to share my journey, how I have made it to consistent 4-figure months today after 3 years of, I would say, slogging it out, but I did it from scratch. And I guess that's the story that I want to share with everyone.
Well, and I think it's a very important story to share. And I think there's a lot of people that are craving for that, because I find a lot of people go, well, yeah, but look at this person, but they're making 6 figures. And I'm like, that's a big span, because there's a huge difference between just peaking over $100,000 and just peaking under $1 million. Like,
Yes.
that's a
Yes.
country worth of roads.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think, Tanya, with every figure that you cross, especially during the initial stages, it's a different ball game. And if you've noticed, the people who've hit 6 figures without having a good, stable foundation, without going through the actual process, usually mess it up at some point, because that's how important it is to have that foundation. And as much as people like to overlook, oh yeah, it's 4 figures or it's 5 figures, I don't think so. I think that's where, if you nail that, it gets easier to kind of wrap your mind around getting to the next figure and then the next figure. I don't say that it gets easier. I think that you just get tougher.
Yeah. Well, and I think you like you said, by doing that, you develop those skills that when you bump
Yes.
into those obstacles,
Yes.
you're almost better prepared, because you're like, okay, no, this is not a problem.
Yes.
And you're also not super reliant on it all
Yes.
working out, right? Because a lot
Yes,
of people go,
absolutely.
oh, well, I'm going to live that life, because we hear that so much, right? Live the life you want. And I'm like, but living the life you want can sometimes make you broke. Like, you
Oh
got to
my
be
God. Yeah.
careful.
Absolutely. And I can't, oh my God, this is so embarrassing, but I'm going to share it. I actually, when I first started out and I was listening to all of this advice, and honestly, this is what really pissed me off and came to the tipping point, was they would be like, oh, you have to spend all of this money into your business because how are you going to get a return on investment? And I did that. And at some point, my bank account was dangerously low, it was dangerously low too. And like almost hitting zero. And that was when I was like, no, this is not the way. This cannot be the way to go. And that's when I realized that investment actually means different things. It could be your own investment, like yourself as a person, the hard work that you put in. It's not always money, if you at all believe in that concept of investment. And I think talking about investment brings me to a really important thought just now. And I think that the return on investment during the initial stages of the entrepreneurial journey is extremely low. I think that for all the money, the blood, the sweat, the tears that you've put in during the initial stages, you only see it much, much later on. And I think that's why it's harder to move past the initial stages of the journey, because you are not seeing your return on investment yet. When you start seeing your return on investment, it gets easier because that keeps motivating you to go forward. But when you don't, then how do you tell yourself to get up the next morning and get to work?
Well, and I tell people too, like, because we hear that so much. ROI, what's your ROI? What's your return on investment? And I always go, what's your ROH? And then people are like, huh? What is your return on happiness?
Oh,
Because at the end
wow.
of the day, that's what matters. Because
Yes.
the money doesn't
Yes.
matter if you're not happy. I mean, it's the
Yep.
same thing, either return on happiness or return on health. Use whichever one you
Yes.
want. But I mean, if you're sick and you're rich, it doesn't
Yes.
matter that you're rich, because you just want to be healthy. If you're rich and you're
Yes.
sad, all you want to be is happy. So,
Yes.
I love that, you
Absolutely.
talk so much about this, because I think it's important for people to remember it really isn't all about the money. It's not all about the
Yes.
figures. It's about, what is it that you actually want? What
Yes.
part of your life, or how much do you actually need to live and be happy? Because like I said, I
Yes.
mean, I was making tons of money but working all the time, and I was
Yes.
living for the 2 weeks that I could take off a year. And when I cut back and realized that's not what makes me happy, I want to be
Yeah.
able to go, it's Tuesday, it's nice out, let's go. Like, I live in Canada, so I'm in Alberta. There's limited summer. I need to have a
You
job that
wanna
I can be
soak it
like,
all up.
sun's out, we gotta go. Close the office, get onto a lake somewhere. Like, go. We have like 12 hours and that's
Absolutely.
it. Summer's done.
Absolutely. And I feel that all of us as entrepreneurs, the reason why we took up this journey in the first place is to give us freedom in some sense, whatever you define as freedom, whatever I define as freedom. And what's the point of going on this journey when you are denying yourself of the very thing you started it for? So I think that was one of the crucial lessons that I have had to learn in the last 3 years, and that is prioritizing myself, prioritizing my happiness.
So let's talk a little bit about all of the stuff that you do, because you got a lot of stuff
Yes.
that which just sings to my heart, because yeah, you know, I mean, you're an author, a podcaster, YouTuber, digital nomad. You have so much stuff going on, but talk a little bit about, I love people who dive into a bunch of different things.
Yes. So I think it's pretty clear at this point that I am extremely multi-passionate. I think that I have always been, right, since birth. I mean, I don't know. I'm a Scorpio, I guess that should define who I am as a person. But I think that when I started out, remember, I was in a lot of pain at that time. So I think that because I had to channel that somewhere and I wanted to make this work, I wanted some sunshine to come out of the pain. I think that I worked. I managed to build all of these different platforms that I'm on. And of course, in between, I did burn out. And then I learned how to restructure it and kind of formulate a strategy for all of them that works and keeps my mental and physical health intact. So for those of you out there, yes, I'm a podcaster. I'm a YouTuber where I vlog about my shenanigans. On Instagram, I usually share my 60 seconds of wisdom, whatever little bit I know. And then what else? I'm a Skillshare teacher as well. So I do put up courses. I haven't in a while, but I am actually planning to get regular with that. Etsy, very, very regular. I put digital products for entrepreneurs and solopreneurs. So basically my mission is, as much as possible, I want to empower small business owners, solopreneurs, and entrepreneurs across the world, because I do not like borders for some reason, across the world. And I want to make sure that they are confidently implementing marketing strategies to grow the business that they love. So that is my mission. And all of my channels in some form contribute to that.
So there is so much, because I've looked and you have great YouTube videos, and as well you have like a lot of like short ones on Instagram that are, like quick tips that people can kind of take and go, because everybody is always saying how busy they are and all of that other stuff. But if you could give, in the sort of marketing platform, where the world has, changed so much over the last few years, what is one of the things that you think that would be an easy thing for people to change, that you see as sort of, I don't want to say that people are doing wrong, but one thing that you're like, if you just did this, you could see a really good change in your social media, let's say?
I think you bring up a very important point, Tanya, that there's a lot of things that are changing so rapidly. And I think that I have just a very simple sentence. And when it comes to marketing, all you have to do, there's a lot of complex marketing strategies out there, but they're not going to work for you or your business unless they have a very firm foundation. And so I will give you a small tip to make sure that your foundation is right. Regardless of how time changes, I'm pretty sure that this will stay consistent. And that is, all you have to do, okay, is create paths for people to find you. It's just as simple as that. Whether they are, in and around you in the shopping mall, or even online in the online spaces, wherever they are, all you have to focus on is creating paths. Now, what do I mean when I say by creating paths? You have to understand where your target audience is first. Where are they hanging out the most? Okay. And then understand where you are at. What's the gap between you and your audience? And then create some path for them to lead to you. Either when you're creating maybe an Instagram post, maybe the hashtags that you use or the kind of content that you're putting out. But the baseline is you've got to find that path that leads them to you. And once you've created sufficient amount of paths for your business, then start interlinking them. So maybe you want people to go from your website to your Instagram page, from your Instagram page to your podcast. Make sure that they are on your pages. Make sure that it's lucrative enough for them to stay on your pages, because the longer they are on your pages, the lesser amount of time they're on your competitions. That's just as simple as that. And then once you have this firm foundation, then you will see how easy it gets to start applying layers of more complex marketing strategies. And frankly, at that point, it's no longer going to seem complex, because it's just going to be the natural next step for you to implement for your overall marketing strategy. So I guess my one tip that will stand the test of time is it's all about creating paths for people to find you. The minute you focus in on that, you will realize that you will find your next step easier and easier and easier.
Oh, I love that. That's such a great tip. And it's so true, like I think
Yes.
sometimes we forget that. I was actually watching a few of your videos before our interview this morning, and you were actually talking about stuff that you're doing. And I was like,
Yes.
oh, I'm so guilty of that, right? Like, I'm like, oh, I have this new thing
Yes.
coming up. And people are like, you do? And I'm like, I should probably tell people. Right? Like
Yes.
it feels like such a stupid thing to
Absolutely.
say. Like I'm like 24
Yes.
years in business and I'm still forgetting to tell people that I'm doing stuff. Like, it's like,
Absolutely.
duh.
Yes. Absolutely. I'm definitely guilty of that even to this day, because I think that one we may hesitate to talk about our own what we're doing. I think there's a natural inhibition there. And number two, I think that we think it might not create a ripple effect or an impact, or people may not buy our product, not be interested, and all of those things. So I think it boils down to a bit of limiting belief over there as well.
Well, let's not do that today. So tell everybody where they can go to find you and all of your stuff.
Yes, absolutely. So you can find me at the Marketing Nomad everywhere. Trust me, that's my online pseudonym. Catch me on any of the platforms. Come in, say hi to me, tell me something that you like about Tanya's podcast, tell me something that you liked about this episode as well. I'd be happy to chat with you. And of course, I'll be giving Tanya the link to my book as well. It's 0 to 4 Figures, Lessons Learned by a Broke CEO. That's coming out pretty soon. I think end of August, beginning of September 2022.
Well, we'll make sure we have all of the links to that,
Yes.
and we'll be letting you guys know. So stay tuned to us, and also make sure that you click on the links to follow Prit as well on all of her areas. It's been such a pleasure to talk with you. Thank you so much for coming on, sharing your wisdom and your story.
Well, thank you so much, Tanya, for having me. And thank you guys so much for listening all the way up until here. It's such an honor, such a pleasure. Absolutely happy to be here.
Well, what most of you don't know is that Prit and I actually sat down with each other to do this interview at the end of July. And I was so excited to release it, but she was still waiting through some editing for her book. So we held off and I've been so excited. And now it is finally out. Her book, 0 to 4 Figures, Lessons Learned by a Broke CEO, is on shelves. And you're going to be able to find it on our website at foxtalksbusiness.com. I'll have all of the links to where you can find it on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and all of the other places. And I am loving this book. So you can get it in Kindle, hardcover, paperback, however you like to listen to it. But it is so good. I'm not going to ruin anything for you guys, but I don't care how long you've been in business. This is a good book to read. It's a real easy read, and I highly suggest it. Now, a little bit of some self-plugging. I was really excited when I interviewed Lindy from Up in a Day. And since then, her and I have been working very closely together. One of the things that I have hated in my business is my website. When I first started this podcast, I put up a website because, well, you know what? They told me that I was just supposed to do that. And so I did. I created it on GoDaddy super quick using one of their templates, and it's always bothered me. There's always stuff that I wanted to change, and it was never the vision I wanted. Nothing against GoDaddy, but I just couldn't manipulate it exactly the way I wanted it. And I sat down after my interview with Lindy, and I was telling her, these are some of the things. And she was like, you know what? We need to work together. And guys, I have to tell you, she took what was in my head, made it a reality, and then went above and beyond. The new website is beautiful. It's elegant. I love it. So if you are sitting there, you're one of those people who are like, you know what? I don't have tens of thousands of dollars to change my website, but I don't really like my website. You are absolutely going to want to find Up in a Day. They did amazing work. It was such quick turnaround from the time that I talked to her about it to the time I actually got to see the website. everything that I had imagined, even some changes that I wanted were done. It was super quick. Everybody was really nice. Her and her team are amazing. I highly recommend it. So if you want to know, head over to my website. You're going to be able to see the new one. And don't forget to head to my social media, because I'll show you on both Instagram and Facebook, you're going to be able to see some before and after pictures so you can actually see the difference. It's amazing, and I highly suggest that company. So I'm going to have the links where you can connect with Up in a Day if you are ready to finally make your website start making you money instead of just costing you money. They're the ones to do it. So no matter what it is that you're doing today, whether you are heading out to buy Prit's new 0 to 4 figures, heading over to finally get the website that you want, or just sitting and relaxing, make sure that you take time to have fun. Because as I always say, if you're not having fun, why are you doing it?